So I thought it would be a good idea for us to do a tutorial on optimization for this shader, because it's quite expensive. I'll be honest about it. It's an auto material. Everything's procedurally generated. Anything that's procedural is usually way more expensive than stuff that's baked. So I thought it would be a really good exercise for us to just go over how we can optimize our grass meshes, because they're rendered thousands of times across the world as you're running through it. So it's really, really important that we have something that looks solid, and it also isn't like insanely high poly. So what we're going to try to do is get this poly count down. Like right now it's 2300. This is outrageous. Yeah, I went a little bit overboard, guys. I really wanted those grass meshes to look good. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you could do this. You could go into 3D Studio Max or Maya and downres the mesh and then have custom normals on it. That would probably be the easiest or the nicest way of doing it to have the best results. But for this, let's just do it quick and dirty, and it'll give you guys a bit of knowledge concerning like how to actually create LODs in the static mesh browser in Unreal as well. So if I bring this up, 2400 tries, we want to bring that down. What you want to do is actually just scroll down until you see LOD settings, and that would probably be at none. But what we want to do is change that to foliage. Click yes. You can change the number of your LODs as well. So let's say 3 and click apply. As soon as we do that, we get a bunch of LODs here, and you can actually see them if you click here. There's LOD 0, LOD 1, LOD 2. But I think I have a bit of a bug right now because I already had LODs on this and then I refreshed the mesh to show you guys. So typically when you regenerate LODs, it would actually lower the poly counts for each one, but you can see they're the exact same for mine. So, but that's okay. But the way this works is LOD 0 is the mesh that you see that's closest to you. LOD 1 is middle, and then LOD 2 is your far one. So what we want to do is we want to lower the poly count of our LOD 0, because 2400 is just, it's way too much. So if we just scroll down, you can see this little tab. Yeah, you can see this little tab, LOD 0 right here. And down here, there's these reduction settings. So this is just all the settings that you can use to control like what types of, how you want to procedurally downres your mesh and lower the poly count on it. There's all these different things in here. I don't really know what a lot of them do, to be honest. I usually just change that LOD setting thing, and it kind of changes the numbers depending on what setting you want for each LOD. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to change my percent triangles right here. I'm going to try, say, 50%. So for my LOD 0, I want 50% triangles. So it's going to be about 1200 tries for my LOD 0. So click apply. So let's take a look. And, you're looking at this in the static mesh browser, which is probably not the best way of doing it. Maybe if you always have an eye on what it's doing in the actual world as you downres it, it's probably a lot better. So let's bring that down even further. Let's just try like 30 and let's see what it looks like. So like I'm not really noticing any significant change on it, and it's actually like 4 times the triangles less than it was before, right? Maybe 20. Let's just see. Yeah, see, now I just lowered it to 10%. It's 238 tries, and you're starting to get some weirdness on the grass. It's actually not that bad though, to be honest. Like in some areas you can see it's kind of clipping the ends out of the triangle right here. Oops. But it's really like not that bad unless you're like really zoomed into the grass. Like I don't think you're even going to notice this stuff, to be honest. So let's try that. 238. Let's save that. Now what we need to do is we need to control how high poly our other LODs are going to be. So if you go up here, you can choose custom, or you could say LOD1 here, and it changes to LOD1 down here. And right now it's at 100, so that's a bit of a bug. So what's happening is it's actually reverting to 100% for LOD1. So what I want to do is I want to lower it to lower than my LOD0. So maybe like 5%, because mine was 10%. If I go to LOD0, LOD1, try 7. It's pretty nice though, just being able to tweak this stuff on the fly. Oh, and actually, do you know what I just realized is that this percentage, it's actually a percentage of LOD0. So if LOD0 is 238 tries, then LOD1 is, right now what it's doing is it's giving me 9% of 238 tries for LOD1. So that's what, 20 tries, which I think we could probably go a bit higher than that, to be honest. Maybe like 20%. Apply changes. Yeah, see, like that's not that bad. And now let's go to LOD2 up here. And as soon as we do that, and that bug that I was talking about earlier, 2400 tries. So we want to bring this number down, say like, maybe like 10. It's going to be 10% of LOD1. So it should be, oh, that doesn't make sense. All right, sorry, it's going to be 20% of LOD1. Yeah, like you guys kind of get it. You just go through and tweak the numbers a little bit. Try to get something that kind of works. You know, this is half the triangle count, 238 to 95, and then when it's really far off, it starts to go really, really low. So maybe try like 20, like 47 tries. It basically halves itself every time, which I think that's pretty good. And yeah, the grass, you can start to see some of the polygons in it now and stuff. Like it's not super, you can't zoom the camera in like this to see your mesh, but like, I don't know. Like when you're running through a game, you're not even going to really notice that stuff. But just because it's a demo, let's actually bring the triangles on our LOD1 just up a tad, maybe like 15% apply. So 357. That's like a little bit nicer, I think. That should be pretty good. So let's save that. And what we can do actually, just to see how our poly count is actually being affected, is there's this command. So if I hit my tilde key, it brings up my CMD at the bottom down here. And if I type stat RHI, so that comes up, you can see our triangle count in our frame. It's actually really, really high still. So that's a bit of an issue. I think that's also because of our really long sight line here. So, but let's just lower that even more. I just want to change it and see how it affects the poly count. See, it's 4.5 million right now. If I click apply, see, I just lowered the mesh down to 119 triangles, and it gave me an extra like 2 million triangles back. So, there's these little things that we can do to just really, really shave off a few triangles. And, if there's thousands of these meshes being displayed on the screen at one time, then any little thing that we can do that's going to save us is key. I think the grass kind of looks like shit now, so I'm going to bring that up a little bit. And even doubling that, it's like I get 3.6 million. That's crazy. So what I'm going to do is bring up my landscape grass objects. Let's see if I can find them. No, sorry, they're in landscape right here. Yeah, so there's this folder. It's called landscape grass types. Let's open that up. And the only material layers here that actually spawn grass right now are the actual top layer and the top layer 02. Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, we have a top layer 01, which is basically our default grass, and then we use a mask to switch randomly kind of all over the place to a top layer O2, which is the one with the flowers over here. So let's search in these landscape grass types. These get plugged into the material and they spawn the foliage for us. So if I open top layer O2 and top layer O1, so this is top layer O1. So that's not the one with the flowers, that's this one right here. If I open this, I can see how densely my grass meshes are being spawned on my landscape. So if I lower this, like just for an example, like look at the poly count right now, 4.7 million. If I lower this to 0, see it goes way down, way down. It's crazy how much the grass affects everything. This number that you're going to want if you're making something for a game, it varies wildly depending on the type of game you're making. I've heard recommendations from technical artists at work that, you know, you should have 650,000 triangles maximum in your environment, for instance. On some games, it's higher than that. If it's a PC game, it might be 4 million. You know, the numbers vary wildly. So, you know, I would kind of say if it's in between like 1 and 4 million, like you're doing pretty good, unless you really have to optimize your game wildly. If you're doing a portfolio scene though, I wouldn't worry about this that much. Let's put our grass density back. It was at 250 before. As soon as I turn that on, it's like boom, the poly count goes through the roof. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lower this, say like 200. You know, get something like a little bit more reasonable. You know, like 175. You know, something like that. That's not bad. You see a lot more of the ground texture here, which I'm not like too crazy about, but I don't know. I think that's good. So that saved us like 1 million triangles right there. So yeah, you also have this end cull distance. And what that does is it makes it so that the grass instances on our environment will actually disappear at around 6,000 units. So it's a really quick way of disabling the density of your meshes, basically, because you're just tightening the radius at which the grass meshes spawn around the camera. So let's say I put this down to like 4,000. Let's, you know, I feel like I can't see anything in here, so I'm just going to open this up. Sorry guys, give me a sec. You start to get this line around the edge of the grass here. But like really, if you're playing, like most games that you play, they have this line and nobody notices it. It's a tiny little thing that we as artists, we freak out about because we want our scenes to be perfect, but I wouldn't worry too much about it, even though I've already worried enough for you to implement 10 different shader things in there to fix it for you. We've got our triangle count to about 2.9 million right now. You know, you could lower the grass density further. You could lower the poly count on the grass mesh. So all these little things that you can do to bring that triangle count down. Oh, and one more thing that I actually forgot to talk about when we were discussing the grass meshes is, here, I'm just going to open that right now. So grass, this guy. So in here, you have this little setting down here. It's in LOD settings, and it's auto compute LOD distances. So see how, like right here, watch this number right here. As I zoom away from the camera, it changes. 238, 95, 47, right? So what Unreal's doing is it's actually auto computing at what % of the screen it needs to switch between LOD 0 and LOD 1 and 2. I kind of want to uncheck that, and then we can come up with our own and test it in the world just to see what it looks like. So just uncheck this, and I think maybe we could get some better distances and shave off a few tries. Yeah, so now that we've unchecked that setting, if we actually go and we can check this custom thing right here, and that basically enables all of our LODs in our tabs. So LOD 0, LOD 1, and if we go to 1, we have this screen size thing right here. And I think it's if your mesh is a specific percentage of your screen size or something, it switches, right? So if I think higher this number, let's say like 0.5, yeah, see? Let's take a look at how so it transitions right there, right? You know, I want to be really intense with my LODs on my grass. I want it to switch from high to low quite quickly. But not quickly enough where it's going to be distracting when I'm walking through the world. So, you know, maybe if I switch this to like 0.3, you can see it's at LOD 0 right now. It's 238 tries. If I zoom out, that's probably a good distance from the camera to switch to 1, because like we don't need all these triangles up close. Like it's way better if it just swaps. If we go up here, if we go to LOD 2, then we can tweak that setting too. I just want to see when it transitions. It's at 95 right now for LOD 1. And so when we're this far from the mesh, it's switching to LOD 2. It's 47. So I think that's way too far. I don't think it needs to be that far. So I'm just going to increase this number. And I just want to see where it's transitioning. Watch the number. Oh. Yeah, sorry. You have to be careful because your numbers have to kind of make sense. If I change the number past 0.3, it actually overtakes LOD 1. Whoops. Why is that not working? That should be pretty good. You can just always, when you zoom in, just watch that number. You'll see where it's transitioning, and if the transition is very like, then you'll know, okay, well, I really need to change this. But it's kind of a juggling act because, you know, you're reducing the polygons at the same time, and, you know, if you're reducing the polygons by, 10 times what they were before, then you're obviously going to get a mesh pop when you switch between them. So click save on that, and let's see what it looks like in here. And I'm just going to full screen this so that it's a lot more visible. Can we see the popping? Yeah, to be honest, I don't even notice it. But I do think the grass kind of looks like crap now, to be honest. You see what I mean? It's just this juggling act of like going through, like testing the LOD distances, playing around with the triangle counts, and playing with the density of the landscape grass type and the culling distance. That's basically how you would bring your triangle count down. Originally it was like 4.7 million, now we're at 1.9. So there's trade-offs that you can make to having a scene that's functional versus, a scene that looks cinematic and pretty. And there's one more thing that I want to do with this grass. And, this kind of goes with the optimization as well. If I actually bring up my grass material, so let's open this up. If you've watched the other tutorial, you'll see that I have this kind of distance fade in here. And, now that we tweaked our grass to be a lot less dense and, it culls out at about 4,000 units, we need to actually go in here and change this distance fade. And so what this distance fade does in our material is it fades out this line, the line that I was just talking about a couple minutes ago. like let's say I match the distance where it fades out, 4,000. And then I change this to say like 1, 2, 3. You know, the higher the number, the more clamped it is. What I usually do is put the number like a little bit higher than when the grass is actually getting clamped out. And then I lower the opacity until it, you know, kind of just fades that line. You can see it kind of fading back here, maybe like 5,000. 1, something like that. But the problem with this distance fade thing is that it actually makes our shaders a lot more complex. So if I go into my optimization view mode down here, if I click lit, I have a shader complexity. So if I click that, this thing tells us how complex our materials are. Green is good, red is bad, which my landscape is not the best, but you know, it's having something that's that complex is going to always cost something. So I'll show you guys how we can optimize it a bit further. It's always going to be expensive though. You can't get procedural stuff like this without it being expensive in some way and without making sacrifices in some form or fashion. So here, green is good, red is bad, pink is quite bad, and white is just terrible. So here, at the edge of our grass, it's really white. And the reason for that is that we have what's called overdraw. So it's where there's dozens of layers of alpha that are all getting rendered one over top of another. So it's just alpha and transparency layered basically, and it's really, really expensive and creates a lot of issues. So anytime we can minimize that, we're gonna save on our frame or on our FPS. If I completely just disable this opacity distance fade, what's going to happen is we're going to get our line back on our grass, but it's actually going to get rid of all that white in our shader complexity and help us with our optimization. So if I turn this off, so you still get that line, but like, I don't know, it's seriously, it's not even that bad. Just being way too anal about it. And now that I've disabled it, let's actually go back into our shader complexity. And all of that white is gone now. So we're doing pretty good right now, I think. It's nice. So we're down to, you know, about 3 million triangles, which is still quite intense, but it's a lot better than the 5 million that it was before. Another big easy win for, you know, optimizing triangle count or polys is getting rid of tessellation. I know tessellation is just the holy grail of creating art, but like guys, in video games, it's like a lot of video games do it, but I seriously don't understand how they do a lot of the time. Like on PlayStation 4, it's some of the poly count recommendations are just insane. So if for any reason you need to disable this, you just go into your landscape material instance and head to tessellation. And I actually have a material, like an actual material that has no tessellation on it. You can use that if you don't ever plan on using tessellation. But just to see the triangle changes here, you can actually just change this near tessellation to 0 and watch this number 2.9. Let's see how much it helps. That did absolutely nothing. Well, that's not good. There's obviously some triangles getting cut. You know, I don't know how accurate this number is either, guys. Like, it's like we're obviously getting rid of triangles here. So maybe it's just a bug or something, but let's say here, if I go into my poly mode, you can do that just by going into your optimization mode, I believe. Or no, wireframe right in here. If I do that and then I turn my tessellation to 0, just watch the ground. Boom. It's like probably like 1 million polys are gone right now. So that's another quick way you can save. If you're trying to make the shader less complex, what you could do is there's a bunch of different things in your material instance. You could start by removing your shore. Like you can see here, like water, anything with translucency is super expensive. So if you really need the water, then keep it. You know, if you're doing a portfolio, this water shader, it's just from the Kite demo, or it's from one of the demos from Unreal. I didn't actually make it myself. It's quite complex. You can see it's in the pink right here. So it's just has a lot of instructions. If you can get rid of that, get rid of it. The shore as well, the global water blend in our material. I have this little checkbox. You can uncheck it, and it's basically going to get rid of all of this stuff right here. All of the procedural shore that's happening right here. I think it'll gain you a few instructions. Like the way it's working is it's essentially just creating like a big mask that's based off of your absolute world space, the Z, across your entire landscape, and then creating a little fade on top of it. There's a bunch of instructions in there. I don't think it's too expensive, but you know, you'll probably get a few instructions back from disabling it. And for those of you that haven't realized already, there's actually a bug with Unreal's shader instruction count here, and it says that my material instance is 98 instructions for my landscape. It's definitely higher than that. I would guess that it's anywhere between 300 and 400 instructions, so it's quite expensive. So we also have these flow maps in the background that are just those color overlays that we've exported out of World Machine that are getting spawned on our rock, on our grass texture in the distance. You could just disable those quite easily. If you scroll to flow map color overlays, you can just disable them all right here. That'll gain you a bunch of instructions. You could also disable your second top layer. So it's not enabled right now because I didn't really need to. Yeah, you could easily just go in there and just turn that off, and it would disable it across the entire world and save you basically an extra material that's getting rendered. We have this distance fade that's happening on our textures. So you can see our rock. You kind of have your up close detail, then you have your medium detail, which is this, and it just reduces the tiling on your far stuff. But we also have the World Machine texture. It's quite far away. I think I'm really gonna have to increase my camera speed to show you guys properly. So if I really zoom out, say like, you know, here, you can actually see our World Machine distance texture right here. And I've basically included an option to disable that distance fade that we talked about earlier, which is, you know, it's your close tight detail and then your medium detail. So you can actually disable that completely if you want. Just by going into, there's two of them. There's one in top layer, and it's just enable top layer distance fade. By default, it's enabled. You could just like check this and then uncheck that. It'll get rid of it, and it basically switches to just your up close detail. So all of this is going to tile like crazy. So what you would need to do is actually really bring in your World Machine texture. So down in your World Machine distance material, you could have it fade to your World Machine distance material at, you know, a way closer value than 250,000. It could be like 10,000, you know, so you'd still get some tiling on that stuff. Actually, well, I might as well just do it. I'm worried about doing it because I'm pretty sure it's going to look like crap. But yeah, let's try it out. So I'm actually going to do it on my grass right now. So let's let those shaders compile. And let's also disable it on our rock. Now you can see it's tiling like crazy, right? still get your flow maps, which they really help. And the grass is getting mipped out at a distance, but you can still see the tiling right here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to my world machine and lower my distance fade on that. So let's say like 15,000 maybe. So it's kind of crap right now, to be honest, but let's say you had a really high res diffuse texture. And, you know, let's say that in Photoshop you added some rocks and stuff in here and tweaked your distance texture so that your rocks actually look like rocks, and, you know, you added a normal map into that. There's a bunch of stuff you could do to just use a world machine texture in the background. But here, I'm going to lower this, because right now I'm using an LOD bias in my texture to lower it to 2048, because originally it was so far off in the distance that it didn't matter that it was low res. But if I change that to 0, it's going to bump it up back to 4096. So let's do that. So it's still not the best, but you could see how if you had, you know, some texture detail in here and stuff in the actual diffuse map texture, if you wanted to do something with Photoshop, you could. So yeah, it's an option at least. Another thing you could do is in the shader you could completely disable the world machine diffuse textures. So if I scroll down here, world machine distance material, you could just uncheck enable world machine distance material. So that's basically another material is just gone from the texture. Another set of textures and a material is basically removed from your shader here. So you could turn that off. So like all of this, it's kind of set up so that you can do what you want with it. You can disable stuff, you can add it, you can change little features here and there, and slowly get back some instructions. And the way that I actually measure how much gain I'm getting is it's by opening up that shader complexity thing up here. So it's right here, optimization view modes, shader complexity. So you can click that. It's the shortcut for it is Alt-8. And you can see like it used to be red. Just with the distance fade turned off, that's actually a huge shader count increase right there. So it's gone from red to kind of brown now, so it's getting closer to green. So that's a quite expensive feature that we have. I also have this kind of expensive version of blending. The way that my blend typically works and the way that it'll work in your guys' package that I give to you is I have this expensive top layer blend that's enabled. And what that actually does is it makes it so that the grass will actually spawn in the crevices of your normal map, of your rock and your dirt and everything, right? But I've actually turned it off for optimization purposes right now. And I just want to show you what it does when it's turned off. So the way that it's blending right now is it's just using the vertex normal of your terrain. So depending on the angle of the slope, it kind of creates this soft blend where it transitions softly from grass to dirt to rock. Whereas if I enable the expensive top layer blend, let's turn that on. If I turn it on, then the grass actually, like the diffuse, the roughness, and the normal, it actually spawns in the crevices of your normal map of your rock. It creates this kind of nicer transition between the two materials. But, you know, it's kind of this subtle thing, and if it's in the background and you're not going to see it up close, then like I just gave an option to remove a few shader instructions just by disabling it. But you know, when it's turned on, you get this kind of nice bit where it's, you know, it's kind of creeping up the side of the rock And here I'm just going to turn the mid one on just to show you too. So the mid is the dirt. If I enable that, it's going to get the dirt crawling up the side of the rock too, and it ends up looking a lot nicer. If you're really having a hard time with your shader instruction count, or you just, the milliseconds on your materials are just way too high, this is probably a really quick way of getting minimal visual difference just by disabling this. And you'll probably save a few instructions. And while the shader compiles, I'm just going to show you guys how you can lower the polygon count of the landscape. Because like right now, this stuff's so far away, but you're getting so many triangles on it. There's some quick things that you can do to bring those numbers down. So if I select my landscape and go in here, I can lower the poly count directly just by changing some numbers in here. So LOD distribution, if I change LOD 0, what that does is it lowers the poly count of my LOD 0, my closest bit of terrain that, is usually right underneath the character. So let's say I change that to 1. You can see, right? Oh, tessellation just popped back in. But like, see the vista? It's like way lower triangle count now. It's like the silhouette of your mountain isn't going to be as nice. But if you're really hurting for polygons, you can get a quick win there. You can also lower the amount of triangles that are being spawned in the distance. So on all of the other LODs that aren't LOD 0, I can lower that, say like 1, brings it way down, right? So you're probably going to save like a few 100,000 triangles just from that. So let's put that back up to 2. Just, you guys can tweak all these settings however you want. For me, I want it to look really nice for you guys as soon as you open it up. Draw calls are really important. A draw call contains like all the information that tells our GPU and our graphics card like about our textures and our shaders and stuff. So we want to keep our draw calls as low as possible. Depending on the complexity of your components and your landscape, you can have lots and lots of draw calls. So if you just go to Google and search for landscape technical guide, you'll get this big document that talks about how all the landscape components are made up and what they do and what their purpose is. But the main thing that you guys need to know is that your landscape is made out of these components, right? So it's basically just a bunch of squares, and each one creates a dynamic material instance of our main material and puts it on each one of these. And each one of these landscape components is essentially a draw call. So if we have, thousands of these components in our landscape, then it's going to make it a lot more expensive. But part of the reason why our landscape is actually divided into components in the first place is so that it can actually occlude itself. So, like let's say here, if I type this command in, so I hit the tilde key and type freeze rendering. If I do that, what that does is it actually freezes the camera in place right here and only shows us everything that's currently being rendered in that specific frame of the camera. So you can see all around everything that's outside of the frustum of the camera is automatically getting LOD'd out, and it's actually just getting occluded, right? All these different landscape components are just gone. It's kind of a trade-off, right? Like, you want as little landscape components as possible in here, but it still needs to be broken up enough that it can be occluded properly. And when it's occluded properly, that means less draw calls. So you kind of have to find a sweet spot for the amount of components that you want. If you guys want to see how many draw calls you actually have, you can just hit the tilde key and type stat scene rendering, and it brings up this big kind of stat panel. And the only one that's really concerning me right now is the mesh draw calls. This is basically like how many objects are being rendered on the screen at once. How many materials are on each object, because each material is basically its own draw call. So based off of our landscape components and, a bunch of our meshes that are rendering, our grass, our flowers, our plants, our sky even, all of those things would be their own kind of draw calls. Just a bit of context here, like, the amount of draw calls that you're allowed to have based off the game that you're trying to make varies wildly, just like the triangle count. Like I've heard that on some stuff you might need 1,500 draw calls, on some stuff it's 2,500, so you just have to give or take depending on the needs of the project. So here, whenever we import like a height map, or let's say we're creating a new landscape, you put your material here, import your height map here. Depending on the size, the resolution of your height map texture from World Machine, you're going to get all kind of different presets of settings here. And there's a bunch of like really specific numbers that we have to adhere to if we want to import our landscape in a way that is going to be optimal for rendering. If I open up the landscape technical guide once more, if you scroll down, it actually has a ton of different recommended landscape sizes, and it tells you all like the amount of components and everything, right? But 4033, that's the one that we used in ours. I know it's a weird number, but that's actually the resolution of my height map texture from World Machine. And it's, long story short, I have 1024 components in my entire landscape right now. So at any time, I could potentially be rendering 1,024 draw calls, depending on my sight lines and how much stuff's being rendered in my camera. So you got to be careful about that. And, I would usually play around, like try to find one of these settings that works good for the game that you're trying to create. It's, you kind of got to test it, and there's a billion things to kind of keep in mind while you're doing it. Just stick to these numbers. They're pretty good. Like there's a few other tricks you can do. Like you could manage your landscape. So like I could say like change component size of my current landscape, and if I wanted less draw calls, I could fiddle with these numbers. And once I do that, it changes the amount of components. So let's say like 7. So there, I'm going to have 83,000 draw calls potentially. So I don't want that. So let's make our quads like bigger. So if I made them bigger, that would say change the amount of components in our overall landscape to 64. But if I hit apply, it would actually change the resolution to 4081. So my texture would actually be a different size. So I might have to go into the settings of my shader and change the landscape tiling on it and a bunch of stuff. So like it's kind of complicated to deal with, but you're probably going to have a technical artist that knows all this stuff anyways. So you'd want somebody that knew what they were doing when they were playing around with this stuff. I just wanted to give a brief kind of, here's a 5-minute explanation of how this stuff works in case you need to change it. I can just bring up my CMD with my tilde key and type freeze rendering once more, and it unfreezes everything from the camera, so it's dynamically updating once more. And I think like another big thing to really keep in mind is just occlusion. Like when you have big sight lines like this, like there's just so much more stuff that you need to render. Just be aware of that when you're designing your map, be it through World Machine or if you're creating a landscape from scratch. Like have mountains that occlude half of your map, because then half of your map isn't going to be rendering at the same time. Like it's a big juggling act, guys. I hope you guys really enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope this kind of gave you a clear understanding of how the landscape works and how you can just get a few more frames per second out of optimizing the shader and the triangle counts of your meshes. Cheers.